Ang ang kagasakan, ang ang kazuchik. I am so glad to be with you today. I'm grateful to be on Treaty 4 and Treaty 6 land. I'm so grateful for the welcome that we received yesterday from the life speaker, Noel Starblanket. And as an Nanga person, I hope that my words and actions are responsible to this land and to the indigenous peoples who have been caretakers of this land for millennia. I am a new faculty member at OISE, and I have to say that as working here for 10 minutes, I have a viscerally resistant reaction to the word indigenizing. And on my way back from the bathroom, I realized that I likely am part of how the university will account or tabulate its indigenizing. And you'll have to check in with me next year, and we'll see how deeply I've incorporated the word indigenizing into my own self-branding. But they may have brought me here to indigenize, but I'm going to talk to you about decolonization. I share this paper in a layered room. This room is layered in significant, long-standing relationships and strangers who might mean something soon. My mentor, Michelle Fine, is in this room. Michelle taught me to be a scholar, and many of the best parts of my work are because of her. Once, when I was still a graduate student, I tried to quit, and Michelle talked me out of quitting, but she has still respected me enough to not try to talk me into staying. Other mentors are here too, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Linda Tuhiwai Smith and for Sandy Grande. Their pages and presence in my life I might have to come back to this part, but have been an ongoing guidance. I have read them at exactly the right times in my life, which has meant that I have read them again and again. And I also unfailingly teach their work. Some ideas can only be said as they have said them. Close friends are here too, those who know intimately my doubts and the millions of tiny wounds that we accumulate on our way to what looks like, on the outside, like success. Marcia and I have done the vulnerable and deliberate work of writing together. Lee and I call each other sister in our text messages, and we both know well what that word means. Other connections and layers fill this room. Several of us have been at meetings and retreats before, tasked only with thinking together. And sometimes this worked, and sometimes this didn't. I am in a leaping moment anyway. I have leapt away from my first job, one that I held for 7 years, and am leaping to another job, away from New York, where I've lived since I was 18 years old, to Toronto, away from one settler colonial nation state to another, away from teacher education to doctoral supervision. So this meeting catches me mid-leap, having packed my old office campus, our campus office, but before I have keys to a new office. I speak into the many layers of settler societies, looking past those barriers like Dr. Linda talked to us about yesterday, to indigenous land and life and futurities. In 2010, I made a quiet decision that anytime anybody ever asked me to talk or teach or write about neoliberalism, I would talk about settler colonialism instead. And I think that what we see in settler colonialism are many of the things that Ivana listed for us as descriptors of neoliberalism, the sort of lip service to the free market, no public expenditures, focus on the individual, distaste of collective action or collectivity or tribes, a flexible workforce, and few state regulations, which all of these can be clearly linked to settler colonial structuring of our societies. Settler colonialism is different from other colonial formations which focus on the extraction of labor and resources. Often, in addition to these extractions, settler colonialism is ultimately about the pursuit of land for settlement. Settler colonialism requires the destruction of indigenous communities to clear the way for settlement. Though through genocide, assimilation, appropriation, and state violence, indigenous presence is erased. Settler colonial nation states are founded on indigenous erasure, and this is where the focus on the individual, the distaste for collectivity comes in. Settler colonialism is relentless, but never fully successful because of indigenous survivance. Indigenous communities have always resisted and have theorized dispossession, even before David Harvey. In the United States and other slave estates, the remaking of land into property was accompanied and is accompanied by the remaking of African persons into property, into chattel. And I think that we should connect this to neoliberalization's ideation of the flexible landless workforce. The remaking of indigenous land and Black bodies into property is necessary for settlement onto indigenous land. In settler colonialism, indigenous erasure and anti-Blackness are endemic. This is why indigenous trans and cis women in Canada, now including me, especially as I bring my daughter to live here, are asking, am I next? While organizers in the United States have to remind again and again to say her name, to bring attention to Black women killed by police, often in custody. Black and brown trans women have been murdered at increasing rates, 10 already in the United States this year. That tops the list of total last year, and of course that's anybody who has been properly gendered. This violence is all connected, and indigenous theorizations of settler colonialism and Black theorizations of anti-Blackness flay open those networks of connections. Scholars have traced the histories of academic disciplines such as anthropology, psychology, bioethics, and education, and their work on behalf of the false logics of emergent settler colonial nation states. Early anthropology sought to study the native to confirm societal notions of the depravity of indigenous cultures and justify the theft of indigenous land. Early psychology was concerned with proving that the intellects of white people were superior to the intellects of Black people, indigenous peoples, and immigrants, some from groups now considered to be white. When we look at the origin stories of many of the academic disciplines, we see that they are entangled with the projects of settler colonialism, justifying the theft of indigenous land and the demolition of indigenous life, and establishing racial hierarchies to justify the enslavement of Africans. From all of this layered leaping, this presentation considers the settler colonial roots of the academy and wonders aloud about the futurities it can entertain. Which parts of the higher education project are too invested in settler colonialism to be rescued? Which parts of academic labor might be refused in order to generate new possibilities? And what might it mean to bite the university that feeds us? So I want to start by showing you a few slides quickly, and we can come back if it's useful. But so these are slides of, these are from the most recent data in the States from 2011 of US doctoral degrees awarded by race, ethnicity, and gender. You can see that in 2011, there were 170,000 plus awarded, and 846 of them were to Alaska Native and American Indian people, and 314 were to Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander people. And then these are the two lists of full-time faculty. The top is the real numbers, and then the second are the percentages of full-time faculty working in degree-granting institutions. So you can say that it's 0.5% of indigenous peoples who are full-time faculty. Right? Other way around, you know what I mean. And then this is a list, and all of a sudden I'm not sure if it's clickable. Can you click on it, friend? Okay, so that is a list of all of the Alaska Native people that have ever gotten a PhD. And the list starts, the first one was awarded in 1970. On the list there are 70 in total. More than 40 of them have been since 2011. I think I'm numbered, well, wait, what I just said doesn't make sense. I'm somewhere in the 30s or 40s, somewhere in the middle. So this is the list. You can see. So 46. So more than half have been, since 2007. We know a lot of these people. Wonderful, wonderful people. But you can see that the list ends at 70. Can I go back to where I was? So I say all this in order to dramatize the small numbers of Indigenous peoples and peoples of color in the university. And the pressure on Indigenous people and people of color to get into and then stay in the academy is immense, even when it doesn't seem that great once we're here. There have been some gains in increasing the diversity of university faculties over the past decade, but these have coincided, or maybe are even part of the rationale for neoliberalization. As faculty have become more diverse, we have been surveilled more intensely. Alongside the politics of evidence, Indigenous scholars and scholars of color are kept in line through a politics of civility, which came into full view at the firing of Stephen Saleda from University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign after he critiqued Israel's deadly actions against Palestinians in 2014. Several weeks ago, a Black woman scholar, Andrea Robinson, became the target of Twitterol, which is Twitter vitriol, from racist conservatives who were angered by her posts about the Confederate flag. This led to a false Twitter rumor that Robinson had subsequently been fired by her employer, the University of Memphis, which was a rumor sparked by the university's own tweet, which read, "Andrea Robinson is no longer employed by the University of Memphis." So within an hour or so, Dr. Robinson used Twitter to share that she had not been fired, but had taken another position at Rhodes College. Rhodes College issued a fantastic statement, a great example of a university having a professor's back, praising her extensive scholarship for bringing, quote, clarity and context to the soundbite world of social media. Most importantly for our discussions, Dr. Robinson used her own blog, which is newsouthnegris.com, on July 2nd in order to describe her reasons for leaving University of Memphis. So she said, amongst other things, wages were low, salary compression was high, the gender wage cap was atrocious, and we were expected to produce and do more with much less. In short, we were supposed to research like a Research One, teach like a liberal arts college, and serve like Serena. A new administration came in and threatened us with increasing teaching loads and a new funding model that would pit departments against one another for resources. MA programs like the one that made me and so many other good students were seen as a drain on resources and less students were paying out of pocket. Budgets were cut. One time it was seriously suggested that we give up telephones in our offices and talk to students via Skype to save money. It was Hunger Games, academic edition, and I knew that even though I was Negris Everdeen, I had to go. So that's from her blog post on July 2nd. And then she goes on to say, but contrary to the ideas about the liberal university, that's not the part I want to read. Some universities with a great deal of labor from faculty and faculty of color in particular have taken this Black Lives Matter moment as an opportunity to lead rather than cower, to have the real tough and critical conversations, to bring research to bear on things that are happening in the public sphere, to reckon with their histories, to serve the communities in which they exist, to look towards the futures. It just so happens that some universities are still driven by doing some coward-ass bullshit. She is an excellent scholar. I really hope that you don't look at my work, look at her work. It's amazing. So I want to think about the labor conditions for Indigenous faculty and faculty of color alongside what I see as the bigger social science context for some communities. These are communities that are Indigenous, ghettoized, and Orientalized communities who are overcoded who are both hyper-surveilled and invisibilized or made invisible by the state, by police, and by social science research. Though these people are overstudied, the promised benefits of participating in social science have been slow to accumulate. I've been asking questions about whether research. So, is research really the intervention that is needed? Is research going to make it better or worse? Is the research going to do what we think it will do? If we need it to do something specific, is it still research? Or do we need research, or do we need organizing? I've also been asking questions about whither research. So why are these the questions that we need to ask in this place? What questions have been asked before, and how satisfying were the answers? What is the history of inquiry in this place? What research crimes have been done here, and what forms of knowing have been dismissed? What questions need to be asked here, even if they are not answerable through research? The external reviewer question that Ivana described yesterday, does the level of productivity seem appropriate to the rank, fastens tightly on the production of pain stories. These are stories that are considered most compelling, considered most authentic in social science research. These are stories of pain and humiliation. Reporting on pain with detailed qualitative data and in people's real voices is supposed to yield needed material or political resources. This is the prominent but unreliable theory of change in the academy. Of course, settler colonialism, other colonial configurations, white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, and the pursuit of wealth by some at the expense of others has indeed caused pain in the lives of real people, and this deserves scrutiny and exposure. It is important that we put settler state violence under scrutiny. Too many Indigenous women are murdered and missing, and too many Black women are killed in police custody. This is, of course, part of the configuration of settler colonialism, which requires Indigenous erasure and anti-Blackness and containment. Inquiry as invasion is a result of the imperative to produce settler colonial knowledge and to produce it for the academy. This invasion imperative is often disguised in universalist terms of producing objective knowledge for the public. It is a thin disguise, as most research rhetoric waxes the poetics of empire, to discover, to chart new terrain, to seek new frontiers, to explore, and so on. The Academy's unrelenting need to produce quote-unquote original research is what makes inquiry an invading structure, not an event. Social science hunts for new objects of study, and its favored reaping grounds are native, urban, poor, and othered communities. So in some related writing, Wayne Yang and I, my frequent collaborator, and I talked about 3 axioms of social science research that ground our analyses of the need for the refusal to inquiry as invasion. And these axioms are that the subaltern can speak, but is only invited to speak our pain, that there are some forms of knowledge that the academy does not deserve, and that research may not be the best intervention that is needed. So there are many ways that those working inside universities account for this work can be in service of communities and social justice. Scholars talk about opportunities to leverage university resources on behalf of communities and other moves to frame university-based labor in relationship to justice. So I want to think with you about theories of justice, theories of change. Over the past 10 years, my work has tried to draw attention to the often overlooked significance of theories of change in social science research. Theories of change are implicit in all social science and maybe all research. The implicit theory of change will have implications for the way that a project unfolds, what we see as the start or the end of our project, who is our audience, who is our us, and who we think things are known, and how others can or need to be convinced. A theory of change helps to operationalize the ethical stance of a project, what is considered data and what constitutes evidence, how a finding is identified and what is made public or kept private or sacred. Muskogee scholar Daniel Wildcat writes that in his collaborative writings with Dakota philosopher Vine Deloria Jr. on power and place, this work was concerned with the question, how shall we live? How shall we live is the driving question of my concerns with theories of change. The need for justice may outlast my years, and I have children in this world. I am a mother, and I need time to bathe my children, to care for them, and to help them grow. My attention to theories of change also intensifies around times of grief, like when I lost my father several years ago, or lost a mentor very suddenly last year. This is the only way that I can talk myself out of grief is to say to myself again and again that life is long, even when we don't have evidence that life is long. How shall we live? How shall I spend my time when I am not bathing my children? The question of how shall I live becomes even more striking in the face of almost certain climate change-driven collapse of some of the human environments in the world, first always indigenous peoples. Whether through rising of water tables, fires spreading, ice caps melting, air saturated with toxins, tar sands wastelands, and wars waged only for oil, the question of how we shall live has an urgency in the Anthropocene. This too should be linked to the drive for productivity. Universities use their strategic plans to simultaneously at the same time say that they're setting the dual aims for shrinking their footprints and increasing faculty productivity, not willing to see how these two goals materially compete. I am using the words theory of change to refer to the beliefs or the assumptions about how social science happens, how social change happens. I don't know how social science happens. How it is prompted or influenced. Much time and human energy is invested in various political activities, but is that how change happens? This is a question that communities and individuals, even though they're working together, may never ask themselves. And probably it's a question that we have to ask ourselves over and over again. Indigenous intellectuals and post-structuralists assert, and these are like indigenous intellectuals and post-structuralists, I think of myself as both, assert that change is inevitable, constant, but what is the role of human agency in such accounts of change? Or is there no role? In North America, most people believe that social change is achieved through social movements. But what is it about social movements that yields change? What does it mean that social movements take different shapes in different nation states, comparing the history of social movements in the United States to Maori movements in New Zealand, for example? Others might emphasize the importance of paradigm shifts and breaks, but how might one spend her time while waiting for the next set to accumulate? In some of my earlier work, I was intent on developing a critique of damage-centered research. Documenting damage is among the most common theories of change in social science. It is a theory of change that mimics the legal system. It's a teleological theory of change that places the Western world and neoliberal ideology at the finish line for societal evolution. It is a colonial theory of change because it locates power and control outside of communities and requires them to appeal to the logic of the state in order to get piecemeal gains. Though ironically, as Signathia Fordham has observed, moral arguments are rarely effective with the neoliberal state or other authorities. It's a powerful idea to think of us all as litigators, putting the world on trial, but does it actually work? Do the material and political wins come through? And most importantly, are these meager wins worth the long-time costs of thinking of ourselves as damaged? When the wins don't come through, researchers focus more intently on the effectiveness of the demonstration, the legitimation or the validity, but not on the flawed theory of change. The theory of change is flawed, again, because it's a colonial theory of change that assumes that it's outsiders and not communities who have the power to make change. It assumes that those outsider power people behave as a judge or a jury behaves and can be convinced by strong arguments and evidence to give up power or resources. Documenting damage as a theory of change pivots on humanizing the oppressed, or providing evidence of humanity in the face or force of oppression. In Toward a Global Idea of Race, Denise De Silva turns the proposition of humanizing upside down. Silva explains that the Western subject is entirely conferred through the exercising of power over affectable others. The Western subject exercises power over others, and others cannot exercise power over it. Others are affected by the power of the Western subject, but cannot exercise power. This produces a dilemma for the Western subject, an anxiety by which affectability is a contagion. The Western subject must make itself separate from others and their affectability, separate in both time and space. This othering and separating is a global project of racialization, the co-production of the West and the subject as located in the West. The Western subject is separated from the other temporally through the teleology of modernity. For Silva, the conferring of human and humanity is always already a racial project, is always already a compromised project. To be human is to exercise power over those made other in this self-same process. The human is made universal, and the other always particular, always teeming, always yearning. Silva observes that this generates two important problems with regard to humanization as the process of liberation. First, the project of liberation is tied to becoming human, which is always constructed as exercising power over others and over the environment. The second is that the affectable others must presume that by demonstrating their worthiness, they might be recognized as human. Sylvia Wynter asks, how are we not to think, after Adam Smith and the Scottish School of the Enlightenment, that all human societies are not teleologically determined with respect to their successive modes of economic production that determine who they are? How are we not to think in terms of an ostensibly universal human history that itself has been identified as one in which all human societies, without exception, must law-likely move from hunter-gatherer to pastoral to agricultural to one based on a manufacturing economy? Documenting damage is about demonstrating worthiness to be recognized as human within a framing of humanity that requires the oppression of others. In this construction of power and humanity, power is scarce. There are limited amounts of it, and it is evident only in wielding it above others. This is what I mean when I say that documenting damage relies on a colonial understanding of power and change. Power is concentrated, it's scarce, and it's always external to the colonized. So, at the risk of bruising some friendships, I ask that we think fully about theories of change that rely on raising awareness or raising visibility. The theory of change assumes that people are just unaware of injustice or the issue, and that in making them more aware, we ready them to take appropriate action. It is, so this is like a radical thing for me as an education scholar to think that maybe education is not what we should spend our time doing. So this raising awareness, well, if we are gonna collapse or reduce education to just being about raising awareness, right? So if we're gonna flatten education to mean that. So this assumes that people will generally do the right thing with the right information. It anticipates that the reason for inaction thus far is missing information or the lack of depth of understanding for the significance of need. Raising awareness is a cousin theory of change to documenting damage. Both often rely on circulating narratives and tropes of the mutilated body, the broken spirit, the flooded neighborhood. Images of destruction compete for dollars on Facebook to wrench the most sympathy for donations, for charity, for hashtag solidarity, for newsworthiness, for value, for mattering. There isn't a relationship between the evocativeness of the photograph and the amount of the donation that goes to those in need. There isn't a relationship between the story of loss and the supplies that come. So much of what we do to compel change relies on raising awareness. But what if we were to disbelieve awareness as change? What if we believe that our own awareness, our own knowing, is enough to make change? What if we did not wait for others to know, but are inspired by our own knowing? What if we hold true that we are the ones who need to know, and not others? What if we believe that we are the ones who can make change, and that others are not more powerful than us to effect change? These are questions that throb at what gets taken for granted as the work of social justice, of organizing, and public scholarship. In contrast to damage, what I have written about is a desire-based research that understands power as diffuse, as abundant, as connective, and relational. Dakota philosopher Vine Deloria Jr. describes power as the living energy that inhabits and composes the universe. Muskogee scholar Daniel Wildcat, writing about Deloria's philosophies of power, explains that his concept of power is non-quantifiable. Power is a qualitative dimension shaping our thoughts, desires, habits, and actions that operates to a great extent without us thinking about it. For Deloria, power is amorphous. It takes many forms. It is diffuse, and it surrounds us as an atmosphere of influences. Power is quite literally flowing around and into us. So I read this as having a great deal in common with materialist theories of power and change, most notably from Deleuze and Guattari in 1,000 Plateaus. And the big departure between Deleuze and Guattari and Deloria, and this is why I had to break up with Deleuze, is that for Deloria contends that if we are properly attentive, power can be used by us. For Deloria, power is social and it is agentic. I'm making some decisions. Okay. So in this neoliberal settler colonial moment, it can be difficult to imagine other theories of change. I always say that it requires a sort of mental yoga to remember other possibilities, other existing theories of change. And in our book, Youth Resistance Research and Theories of Change, Wayne Yang and I created a list of other popular theories, and I can never remember what's on the list. I have to go back to that Word document and look it up to remember, because raising awareness and documenting damage figures so prominently in my imagination. So here is the list, and I did have to go back to our book to remember it because I just can't. So this is the list that we came up with. Boycotts, psychotherapy, peace, revenge, anarchy, prayer, and doing nothing. That's the one that most settler colonial nation states are doing in terms of climate. That last one. So Wayne and I have written about how analytic practices of refusal provide ways to negotiate how we as social science researchers can learn from the experiences of dispossessed peoples, often painful but also wise, without serving up pain stories on a silver platter for the Settler Colonial Academy, which hungers so ravenously for them. Analytic practices of refusal involve an active resistance to the draw against the draw to trade in pain and the humiliation, and supply a rationale for resisting the settler colonial gaze, which wants those stories. Refusal can comprise a resistance to making someone or something the subject of research. It is a form of object list analysis, an analysis practice with nothing and no one to code. Analytic practices of refusal can help researchers and the people who prepare researchers to avoid building our careers on the pain of others. As we have learned from Audra Simpson's earlier writings, refusal is a generative stance. It's not just a no, but a starting place for other qualitative analyses and interpretations of data. Refusing the colonizing code of research must precede, exceed, and intercede upon settler colonial knowledge production. several years ago, I write a lot with Wayne. So several years ago, we wrote about the growing prominence of decolonizing discourses in education and social science research. And we've argued that the too easy incorporation of decolonization alongside other civil and human rights-based social justice projects is yet another form of enclosure, of appropriation and invasion. Decolonization, we argue, wants something different than how those projects are usually conceived. When metaphor invades decolonization, it kills the very possibility of decolonization. It recenters whiteness, it resettles theory, it extends innocence to the settler, and it entertains a settler future. Decolonization is not a stand-in term for the other things that we want to accomplish in order to improve schools and societies. It does not have a synonym. Decolonization in a settler context is fraught because empire, settlement, and internal colony have no spatial separation. Each of these features of settler colonialism, empire, settlement, and internal colony, make it a contradictory site of decolonial desires. So in the full-length version of this paper, I turn to 3 examples of theories of change in which place and land are engaged meaningfully. And I see these as compelling theories of compelling change. All 3 are authored by Indigenous women, and all 3 consider change and land materially. And all 3 move within Indigenous understandings of power and place. I offer them, not here but in the paper, I offer them to contest the colonial theories of change which overdetermine what counts as knowing and action in the social sciences, and to describe closely a selection of theories of change which intend to bring about the rematriation of Indigenous land and life. So the first is Mishana Goman, this concept of remapping that she lays out in full in her 2013 book, Mark My Words. The second is Lisa Brooks' concept of placemaking, which she lays out in full in her book, The Common Pot. And the third comes from Karina Gould, who is a community organizer and a Ohlone woman working in the Bay Area, and her shell mound work. And descriptions of that work and interviews with her are widely available on this thing called the internet. So what I want are theories of change that are not deferments of time, not deferments of place, not deferments of responsibility and power, not kicking it to the next generation, but ones that say, okay, we are the ones who need to act. Each of these theories of change expose the matrices that settler colonialism, but almost as a side project. The main energy is dedicated to providing multiple points of entry and multiple opportunities to draw meaning, value, and action from the work. These theories of change are anticipatory and proactive, not reactive. They interrupt existing knowledge hierarchies, taking seriously the expertise that is derived of lived experience. They require humility and vulnerability, contestation and creative production. They make space to speak what is otherwise silenced and make transparent that which is otherwise concealed. They make meaningful that which is otherwise forgotten or devalued. There is a dignity in the work of creating a space for ourselves, the kind of space that has been systematically denied to us. Earlier, I shared a list of theories of change that I can't remember. I can't even remember it now, really. I can't remember them because remembering other understandings of power and change can be so difficult. I also can't remember them because they are not my theories of change. These are not Indigenous theories of change. Lately, because of this memory problem, I've been keeping a list of theories of change in my cell phone so that I can remember something more meaningful than raising awareness, something more material than raising consciousness, and something more to the touch than visibility. So this is my list on my phone of compelling theories of change. I just lost it for real. So this is the secret list on my phone: haunting, visitations, maroon societies, decolonization, revenge, and mattering. I'm finished. Sure, how much time do we have?
5 minutes or so.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to a slide that I didn't talk about, but maybe will generate some conversation.
Invite members of the group to engage with me.
Well, I'm interested in the change in citation practices due to collaborating.
Sure. So a couple of different conversations have made me aware of the short-lastedness of having a really great conversation and learning from each other, and then how that translates, or learning that you've been thinking about something in a way that is pretty whitewashed or pretty invested in settler colonial framings of the universe. And then how hard that is to translate into our citation practices, because usually the list of citations is something we do in a hurry at the end, and we've inherited a lot of them from books that were on our mentors' bookshelves, or we're just never got around to redoing the ones, and so we always use certain so-and-sos to talk about certain so-and-sos ideas. So this is a challenge that I have crafted with Wayne Yang and with Ruben Gastambide Fernandez. It's a Google link that I can tweet out, or it's pretty Googleable. And it's a year-long challenge. It started in April, and people are signing up in order to say, these are the citation practices that are things that need to change. I need to be more intentional about citing these authors rather than these authors. And this is from the idea from Sylvia Wynter that when you change your history, you change your future. So when I change the history of the ideas that I'm talking about, or I change the genealogy of the ideas that I'm talking about, then that changes what becomes possible, what ideas become available to us. So that's something that people have been signing up for since April, and in September, when classes begin again, we'll start rolling out some DIY, do-it-yourself assignments and different things to think about and self-challenges in order to change the way that we're even framing our work. And that's also very informed by Sarah Ahmed's work on citation.
Just briefly, if I can ask one quick question, which is going to be a long answer, but the word mapping and how may that play into those citation practices and the storytelling if we were to use word maps in multilingual manners?
That's a good idea. I don't know that I have a thing that I can say right before lunch about that, but I can talk about it over lunch. And I think that what has been elegant has been the way that Indigenous women scholars in particular have been theorizing mapping, and Dr. Linda is one of the people that's done that really elegantly too. So, I mean, I think Dr. Linda's listing of the 25 Indigenous projects, that is the world map from which I am operating. And so I think of myself constantly as in relationship to those different projects that she has mapped out. So I think mapping is as problematic as the maps have been. Settler mapping has been. Indigenous mapping is quite futuristic.